to My on Mondays, an explorative approach to the possessive my through narratives, art, and sound. I'm Matt Bunk. This week, a live recording from Daniel Mosakewicz's It's Pop Culture reading at MING Studios this past week. Daniel is a writer originally from North Carolina, now residing in Boise, Idaho, where he says he spends his time eating Mexican food and listening to Bruce Springsteen.
We have always had stories. Before we called it culture, they were myths. The delusions and dreams that we all agreed were real. The web, which bound us together and told us the stories we told about ourselves and about each other and the world and how we related to it. Now we call it culture. Tonight, as we descend down the web, through the commune into the mind of a single individual and back into the web, we will have different guides, each one sharing a piece at a time and a place. Each piece will be connected by an epigraph, an invocation, an acknowledgement of the other strings on the web. To reach our first piece, I will be quoting, unsurprisingly, from Bruce Springsteen. Roy Orbison singing for the lonely. Hey, that's me, and I want you only. Don't turn me home again. I just can't face myself alone again. So this first piece is the beginning of a novel, so you don't need any context. I first met Jade on a job. This was back near the beginning when villain teams were like bands. You jammed with some new people, doing your best, doing some quality work, hoping you'd make enough of a splash to either pull off something great or get picked up by someone with real money behind them. We all thought we could make something of ourselves, get to the big leagues just by being innovative and interesting and having a better shtick than the next guy. Not that we were all doing it for the popularity, but there's definitely something to it. Having your name plastered everywhere, being so anti-establishment that angsty college kids called you grunge and probably would have hidden you in their mother's basement if they meant they got to help you stick it to the system. It seems stupid now, but before the infinite killer robots, alien invasions, and honest-to-God psychopaths, it wasn't impossible. Hell, even Lancer was almost a household name for a little while after he managed to kidnap some CEO's kid in '06. A dude by the name of Big Brain had set out through the usual channels that he was looking to put together a new supervillain team. Nothing serious, but a nice little outfit to pull some quick job and get us all rich fast. Standard fare. Brain would get an extra cut for assembling the team and the plans, but otherwise, an even split. I was still young, hungry, talented, and all the things you're supposed to be at 22, which meant I was also about having as much success as you're supposed to have in your 20s. None. We met up at a warehouse Brain rented. Even back then, it was standard procedure to show up in case to join early for safety, as if we weren't all just scoping each other out. I snuck around, feeling every bit like the hot young badass I wanted to be, until right there, in the middle of the warehouse, not a care in the world, was a girl my age, leaning against one of the warehouse's beams, reading a battered copy of The Grapes of Wrath. It wasn't that she was trying to look cool, she just was. Brain came out then, annoyed that the expected bustle and shifting was thrown out. The meeting went as usual from there. Brain presented a plan, pretended everyone else could contribute, then told us where to be and when. It's a miracle I picked anything up, much less that I was supposed to disable the security system for the bank. Jade, for her part, never once looked at me. She was too busy paying attention, not like some front-of-the-class nerd, but because she thought this was important, that it was a commitment, something that she said she'd do. This wasn't love at first sight, it was so much worse. Love at first sight is a load of shit, everybody knows that. But this was nothing more than me being ambitious and young and horny in the way I suspect most people are at some point in their lives. This was believable, the kind of thing that happens to people. If there had been some sudden willingness to die for this person I'd never met, I would have been able to put the whole thing down to some pheromone power, something that messes with your head. It would have saved us both a lot of hurt. The robbery was 3 days later. Like most things in life, none of it went how it was supposed to. The wrong people showed up at exactly the wrong time, and some of us got out anyway. My part went off without a hitch. It certainly wasn't my fault that one of the idiots taking their money out that day just happened to be a close friend of Grease Lightning. And it certainly wasn't my fault Big Brain began to crumble the second it was clear his calculated plan had gone to shit. Around the time Grease showed up and started beating the tar out of the rest of the group, I found myself holding a briefcase with about $10 million in it and sharing my cover with a very pretty woman. Not a bad place to be for 22. Gunfire roared, some of it from the cops, some of it from our people. So, I asked, feigning indifference, poorly. Does a girl named Jade also like diamonds? Not bad, if I do say so myself, and completely wasted. My disruptor was off. Before I could turn the knob and go again, there was a crack as the side of the building exploded. Ultra slammed into the fight, Legionnaire right behind him. We were fucked, no two ways about it. That left only one thing to do. I dumped the suitcase of gold and scrambled to the nearest bystander, a well-dressed man who was aging almost as well. His eyes widened as I closed in, and me going through his pockets didn't make anything better. Please, my wallet's in my pants. I shook my head, wrist looking back at the fight. We were losing. Besides that, Jade was staring at me. I gave her a thumbs up and flicked off the disruptor. Do you have a notepad? I shouted at the man over the sound of Brain getting hit in the face by Legionnaire's shield. Inside pocket, it's not worth much. The man reached for his watch. Please, this is good money, just let me live. I shoved open the dude's jacket, felt around. The notepad was right where he said it'd be. There was no pen with it. Of course not, the fuck would there be a pen with a notepad? Pen, I snapped. The man looked confused. I asked you if you have a goddamn pen. There's a cute girl over there, and I'm trying to give her my number, so come on, help a fella out, all right? Businessman fumbled around some more, pulled out a worn piece of shit pen, held it to me, his hand shaking so bad that he dropped it. Thanks, I snapped, before grabbing the pen and running back to Jade, scribbling all the way. Writing the terms of your surrender, Jade asked. She poked her head out and fired a pulse that managed to keep grease still long enough for our heavy to punch Legionnaire in the face. It didn't matter, Ultra was there. It'd all be over in seconds. Don't be absurd, I'm giving you my number. The look on Jade's face was priceless. This is hardly, look, I said, we're all about to go to jail soon, but I'm going to make a break for it anyway, so save that for when we both get out on good behavior in about a year, okay? And in one of the true triumphs of my life, Jade took the fucking card. She even covered me after I winked and made my break. Rest of that little scene played out how I knew it would. Our asses in jail and the hero's asses kissed by everyone until there was something new to praise them about. Honestly, I never expected to hear from the pretty girl who'd been reading the Grapes of Wrath again. She had class, far too much for a punk like me. I was young, but I was old enough to know that. A year later, after getting released to make room for some of the more deadly fuckers in the power dampening cells, I got a call. We met at Rick's. She suggested it. Our second date was dinner and a movie. One of the theaters was showing Some Like It Hot, and look, Marilyn Monroe is so gorgeous in that film that I'm pretty sure I'd kill someone for the chance to be with her. Did I still notice that? Of course I did, but I watched Jade too, more than I thought I would, to where about halfway through, right about the time they get to Florida, I realized that she was watching me too, which sounds silly and so high school, and maybe it was, but that doesn't matter. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't some stupid kid flirting with danger. I was flirting with a woman, and I was pretty sure she was flirting back. In a world where miracles were becoming nothing more than ordinary, that was the only thing beyond belief. So this next piece is a poem, and our epigraph for it is from first Guardians of the Galaxy film, where Star-Lord says, I think quite appropriately, I come from a planet of outlaws. And this poem called 21st Century Outlaw. Is the new century where the modern outlaw's at, giving out free hugs, no children, just dogs. Feed the hungry, pirate your movies, because the real crooks are in power, touching kids and getting fat, and all the promises that got held back. Bastards rigged all the markets, and they killed country music, shoving robots down our throats and burned freedom's last boats. This country is built on blood. It ain't pretty, but it's true. If it all keeps going on, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm gonna get drunk and twirl my pistol. I'm gonna have a private pagan revival, and I'm gonna kill me some fucking Nazis, just like my great-granddaddy. We'll blow up data centers and pick up trash out the river. This land cries out for the blood of patriots and tyrants. Where are the modern outlaws at? And this third piece is a little bit longer, so buckle in. And the epigraph's a little bit longer too. It's from the Books of Magic, Book 3, written by Neil Gaiman, who we're all very mad at right now, but has a lot of very important things to say on this subject, so bear with me on this longer epigraph. And this is Titiana, Queen of the Fays, speaking. That's all the context you need. You wish to see the distant realms, very well, but know this first. The places you will visit, the places that you will see, do not exist. For there are only two worlds, your world, which is the real world, and other worlds, the fantasy, Worlds like this are of the human imagination. Their reality or lack of reality is not important. What is important is that they are there. These worlds provide an alternative, provide an escape, provide a threat, provide a dream and power, provide refuge and pain. They give your world meaning. They do not exist, and thus they are all that matters. Do you understand? So the piece is the first two sections of a short story, not the third section, but I think that works. The piece overall is titled Devils, Sand, and Blood, and part one is Devils. Of the three people who decided to kill Curtis, only two of them had to drag him to the hanging tree. Both were men, one strikingly handsome and the other unfathomably ugly. The handsome one had pale skin and a strong jaw, with dark hair that wasn't long but wasn't short either, that managed to never fall into his eyes. It had been said his smile could melt steel hearts, but Curtis had never seen or experienced it himself. The ugliness of the other came from his incredible weight. It was impressive that each step didn't hand him a heart attack on a silver platter, and even more impressive that a horse could carry his weight. He did not possess two chins, but a landslide of them. Even the relatively short ride to the hanging tree brought forth a sweat so great it made the fat man look like he was covered in grease. Curtis was somewhere in the middle, though he liked to think he was a bit closer to the handsome one in terms of looks. He wasn't big, but not weak. His head was close-shaven, and his skin matched his eyes, a piercing brown. They were the color of real earth. That's what his mother had called them, the color of real soil. Granted, he looked better before he'd walked behind a horse with his hands bound by rope across almost 5 miles of desert. Everything hurt. His skin cracked and peeled, his wrists bled, and his legs burned. It would have been a relief when they'd stopped, if they'd stopped anywhere but the hanging tree. Maybe if Curtis had felt his dignity was still worth something, he wouldn't have fallen into the sand. Laying in the sand was a hell of a lot more comfortable than standing, even if it burned. Now look, John, the handsome one said. You've gone and killed him before we could dispense some proper justice. Bah! John spat past his chins. He's just playing. Maybe he thinks he'll get out of it. But there are ways to know. There are always ways. He tugged on the rope tied around Curtis's wrist, and a cry came from the dying man's lips. See, Gabe? John said with a chuckle. He's still breathing, all right. Good. I'd hate to waste my time stringing up a man who was already dead. Curtis moaned, but his mouth was so dry it hardly came out as a squeak. He lifted his head to get the sand out of his eyes. The heat sucked at his sockets. When he blinked, it felt like his eyelids scraped against sandpaper. These pains, combined with this angle of the sun, made everything appear like a cheap shadow trick, the kind done to entertain children. Even still, it was enough to make some things apparent. Despite their talk, John and Gabriel had little intention of completing the task quickly. They lounged on their horses, fanned themselves with their hats, and pawed at one of the numerous canteens of water they'd brought along. Perhaps they were avoiding work back at town, perhaps they liked having the chance to catch up, or perhaps the dirt was prettier when you hadn't been condemned to die in it. Whatever the case, neither looked at Curtis. They talked about him, though. Still can't believe the boss didn't want this done in town on public and the like, said John. Even from his spot on the hot sand, Curtis could hear the chewing tobacco in the man's voice. It's because you're a fool with no pride, Gabe said. If the boss hadn't killed in town, then everyone would know that this here piece of dirt was running around in his son. Tommy, their speech brought his face to the front of Curtis's mind, all flushed and smiling as they met in their secret places to stare up at the stars or at each other. He was beautiful in Curtis's mind, as he always would be, as everyone agreed he was. He'd give anything to see Tommy again. Curtis ducked his head as if in prayer, and he brought his hands together. That was when he saw them. There, in the sand, not 3 feet from his knees, were 2 guns. They gleamed in the harsh sun, and despite being surrounded by the sand, they lay perfectly symmetrical, not a grain on either one. Both had a skull worked into the handle, a mark of expert craftsmanship. Curtis was a practical man. He did not believe in miracles, but he wasn't the type to look a miracle in the mouth either. He looked to his captors, both distracted by bickering. Curtis looked back to the guns. The skulls seemed to grin at him, as if they knew his situation and knew what their presence promised. Curtis knew what they promised too: freedom. He reached for them, all remorse gone. Though the sand around them burned, the weapons were eerily cool, and to Curtis's surprise, they fit perfectly in his hands as if they'd been made for him. As Curtis inspected the guns, the skulls stared up at him and seemed to laugh. Both the weapons were loaded. The bullets gleamed in their chambers, miraculously free of sand. Curtis was so absorbed in the guns, so taken in by their presence, that when the voice spoke, he almost dropped his newfound salvation. Hello, the first voice said, a deep voice that resonated through the cracks of his mind. It wasn't loud, but it still silenced all of Curtis's other thoughts. It was a voice like thunder. At first, Curtis thought he was hallucinating, pretending there were other voices in his head as the end drew near. And then the second voice spoke. No time for dramatics! The second voice was lighter. It cackled, popped, and danced around his mind, a voice like lightning. "They've seen you, human," the second voice announced with glee. And indeed, John and Gabe shouted to drop his guns as they reached for their own. "Last chance," the second voice cried, and then, together with the first one, "Do you accept our deal, a life of our choosing for yours?" Without thinking, without considering, with only the desire to live and to kill the two bastards before him, Curtis thought yes. His entire body became energized, filled with power so hot that it froze. It crackled through him, and though the goons had started their draw, Curtis's hands zipped through the air. In less than an instant, he pointed and pulled the triggers. The air shattered as the guns went off, and the second voice cackled as the bullets burst forth in a blast of blue hellfire. Gabe fell first, his light frame pushed off his horse by the impact of the bullet. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. A hole where the bullet broke flesh charred and cooked. John, too, lurched on the bullet's impact, though he slumped instead of falling. His poor horse nearly fell as it tried to run. Curtis didn't stop shooting. Hell, he couldn't stop. Something visceral tore through him. It started in his gut and burned its path of destruction out through his hands. He vaguely identified the feeling as hatred. It took John a whole second to fall off his horse. By the time he had, Curtis had put so many bullets into John's flabby frame that his stomach had popped. Curtis felt a jolt of satisfaction when the body slapped the blistering sand with a thud. John's horse picked up speed and bolted in the same direction as its companion. Curtis stood a second, alone with just the tree, the sand, and the voices in his head. "Woohoo!" the second voice cheered. "You lit them sons of bitches up!" Something snapped inside of Curtis, and he fired his 13th bullet into Gabe's head before he could pull himself back together. He sucked in air through pulsing breaths, realizing he was panicking, and fumbled with the guns. The barrels snapped out, and Curtis ran his thumbs along their sides, spinning them along. Both guns were full, not a bullet missing. Curtis tried to laugh, but his throat burned so bad he stopped. "Are you still satisfied with our end of the bargain?" the first voice asked, the one that came from the deep, the voice of thunder. "Yes," Curtis said aloud. His throat was dry. His tongue stuck to the top of his mouth. It only mildly disturbed him that his first thought of liquid was Gabe's blood. "Good," the first voice rumbled. "Now comes your end of the deal." Curtis wiped his brow. The guns buzzed in his hands. The sun was directly above, burning, hating, and laughing. "Where do I need to go?" Just this one favor, then he would go home. He could go back to Tommy. With the guns, with the power, not even Tommy's bastard father can do anything about it. "The town you come from," the first voice said. "You're heading back, baby," the second voice cackled, and Curtis smiled. Perfect. Part 2. Sand. After that, the voices left him. The space they'd occupied in Curtis's head felt as empty and dry as the desert around him. He stood alone, so alone that the only rational response was to fall down and cry, and Curtis would have done so if he'd had any water left inside to cry with. He was so alone that the desert seemed alive with that perfect mixture of hatred, cruelty, and indifference. Curtis was dying. Before, he'd thought it would be hanging from that tree, like Christ, like Woden, a voice he didn't recognize whispered, and Curtis thought for a second that he was not alone, but he was. But now he was sure. He was further along the path, closer to those golden gates, the last place of temptation, the world between worlds, not dead yet, but not alive either. Unlife, undeath, yes, that was it. He was of the undeath, an intruder into the world below, an intruder into his own realm. Only here, in the limbo of sand and heat, was he welcome. Curtis saw things that the part of him which was still alive knew were false. It started with a fly that buzzed in circles before settling on his nose. He was glad for the itch, so grateful for the feeling that he begged for it as long as it was caused by another living thing. His hand twitched, trying to convince him that he should swat this one. The fly was saved by a tremble, a shifting and shaking of sand. Curtis's eyes fell back onto the expanse. The sand and air shimmered so bad that it looked like when he'd opened his eyes after his brother had thrown him in the creek. Still, his eyes caught movement. How hadn't he seen it earlier? In the distance, a mountain was moving. A wall of sand rolled towards him, pushing on like a wave, eager for shape. If he were alive, he would turn and run. If he were dead, he would have carried on walking. But he was undead, and so he was pulled in both directions, forward and backwards, life and death, pulled apart until he had no choice but to fall down into the sand, each grain burning whatever flesh it found. Maybe he screamed, maybe he bit his tongue, maybe he did both. The wave did not stop. It broke, but rather than a gurgling, drowning white foam top, the top of the wave opened to a maw, dark and deep and lined with teeth. Sand cascaded off, revealing slits along its flanks, and wings of wrinkled flesh spun around it. Curtis realized the beast was spinning. The maw rose and rose into the air, the beast impossibly large, incredibly monstrous, incomprehensibly real. It rose and loomed over Curtis, cutting off the sun, creating a sudden cool over his flesh, making him feel as dirty and sickly as a corpse. The creature reached its apex and let out a shrieking roar that convinced Curtis it could envelop a whole world if it wanted to, and then the beast dove. Curtis didn't draw his guns, he couldn't have. The beast came down, so all Curtis could see was darkness, its maw drawing closer and closer, but never touching him, rushing by until the beast had spent itself into the earth, and Curtis found himself staring at the sun again. His hands and face burned. He blinked or tried to, but his eyelids almost refused to rise. The fly came back. Maybe it never left. It appeared on Curtis's nose, tickling along his burning and flaking skin like it was dancing. Curtis struggled to his feet, knees popping. The fly followed, buzzing up past his chest and into his ear. He swatted idly, missed the insect, and slapped himself in the face. He staggered but did not fall. On and on he walked, across sands, across worlds, across dreams. The sun followed. Then came the hill, a dune so large it may have been a mountain. Curtis pressed on for the slope, not once considering going around. He was grateful for his boots. The dune provided a little shade, but not much, especially to his exposed head. The fly buzzed down his neck. When Curtis looked up, it was impossible not to. He found himself further from the summit than he'd been before. Sometimes, but not always, when he looked up, there was a boulder before him. He never pushed it, never even reached for it. That was not his burden. He was not dead yet, not fully. On Curtis went, slipping back in space, in time, in the sand, 3 more times before he finally fell to his knees, screaming from the pain as sand leapt into his mouth. For the briefest moment, he considered giving up, laying down and letting the sand swallow him. It would have been tempting, but something inside wouldn't let him. Not a sense of courage, but some deep, true fear. For he knew, as all who cross the world between worlds do, that those the desert defeats never leave its grasps. To give up would not bring him peace. Only the living can have temporary rest, just as only the dead possess persistent peace. The undead have no peace at all. He rose and began again up the mountain. It continued to resist, to slide under his feet, to try and send him back down. For all its effort, the mountain and all the billions, maybe trillions of particles that composed it failed. Sweating like sin, Curtis reached the top of the mountain. Then he almost fell off it. Before him was a valley, deep and green and pretty as could be. Most pretty of all were the horses. There must have been 100 of them, beautiful brown and white strawberry roans, wandering, grazing, and rolling like a great big wave, washing back and forth between the edges of the valley. Curtis could have cried. Hell, maybe he did. If the undead could feel joy, Curtis would have. And then the wind came. It swept in full of heat and suffering, armed with claws that tried to tear the skin off his skull. It did even worse to the valley, bursting in and slashing around in wild fury. Curtis looked on as skin peeled off the horses, flaking off their bones and swirling into the air. Blood poured like waterfalls, like Hector, like Revelations. The horses were silent in their pain, screaming and rolling in the blood. It did nothing to stop the wind, for this wind was not our wind. It does not feel, it does not occasionally wander and toss and love. The wind of the world between worlds had been lost for so long as forever is, that it had forgotten those things, for it too is undead. Flesh tore and peeled until the air was thick of it. Round and round it went until the skin swam up the mountains, a school of fish lifted up by unseen seas. And then the valley was empty, save for the bones of the roans and the sands of the desert. Curtis tried to take it all in, the passing of life and the passing of time, how neither one of these things really mattered. But then the sun came to his eyes and he stumbled into the valley. Each step down was treacherous. It took all his effort not to slip, but it kept his mind from comprehending the desert. The fly plagued him the whole way down. Maybe he tried to spit at it, or maybe his mouth had been hanging open on its own, but the fly managed to swerve in between his teeth and land on his tongue. He tried to spit it out again, but in vain. Then came the coughing, massive heaves that made him feel empty even of his own bones. Still the fly held on. Curtis stumbled forward, no longer caring where he went. His hands rose from his sides, flailing as they dug into his cheeks, and his finger clawed between his teeth. He knew he must have looked like a madman, a lunatic. He clawed and pulled until blood leaked from his skin and pooled in his mouth, the first minor relief, sticky and full of iron, tough as it was, life and death in the same act, undeath. And so this last piece is actually an essay, because I talked about, I feel like I went very symbolic and very deep in this, and That's well and good, and that's a lot of fun. But really, to me, all of this stuff, popular culture, the images, the myths we imagine and we choose, are all, they're all very personal things, and I think it's easy to get lost in that in the academic discussion. And so as you can see, the costumes have all come off because this is me, right? This is as close to honest as I can be to you right now while I am here and you are there, and we're here, right, on the text. But this is an essay, shocking no one, titled Bruce Springsteen and the Promise of Redemption. Bruce Springsteen has a lot of magic tricks. He is perhaps the last rock and roll messiah who came to lift up the world and help us ascend to that better place. His voice is how I imagine God's. I love Springsteen's work for a lot of reasons, his sense of storytelling, his ability to sound like a real person. But if I had to put a fine point on it, my obsession with Bruce's music comes from my understanding of his conviction that art, and specifically rock and roll, is a redemptive force pushing and pulling us into that higher plane of existence which might make the stupid fucking thing we call life worth it. I've been reading some academically minded work of Bruce's catalog, and while almost everyone acknowledges the greatness of the Born to Run album and Born to Run the song and Thunder Road in particular, all of these academics want to spend more time talking about Nebraska or Darkness on the Edge of Town, his first two albums, his more explosive and jazzy roots. That's all fine, and to each their own, and yes, I understand that in order to make the argument that Springsteen's work belongs in the great canon of world art, we need to establish it as something serious, and Nebraska is probably the best way to start that conversation, but it's essential to me that we remember Born to Run is the album acknowledged as Bruce's best, and it's the album which continues to set him apart both musically and as a rock and roller. The quest Bruce's music is obsessed with, all of it, even the early stuff, even the later stuff, is the hunt for the promised land and, more importantly, redemption. All of it is some sort of defiant stand against the meaningless of the universe. Yes, the promise is a more mature understanding of the way the world is, but Thunder Road is a better piece of art because of how it manages to make people, me, who know exactly how the world works and exactly how little hope there is in it, believe that things aren't over yet. That even though I ain't that young anymore, it's worth to show a little faith because there's magic in the night. See, that's the magic trick of Bruce's best work, is to push back the darkness and to make even a cynical son of a bitch like me think that maybe there's hope and love and beauty in this whole fucked up thing. I may prefer movies and books with dark, uncertain endings where good might win but the hero loses, but I love Thunder Road because for 4 minutes and 48 seconds, I've still got a shot to get the girl in the car and the road's wide open and my life isn't set in stone and goddamn it is a whole world full of losers and I'm pulling out of here to win. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that worth more than all the hard lessons shoved together? Maybe if we had a little more faith that things could be better, they really would be. See, I have to believe in the promise of Thunder Road because if going out there and searching for something better, which for me and from what I can tell was for Bruce, is art, then why the fuck am I doing any of this? Without the hope that things can be better, that I can do something to run towards better, that I can make something beautiful still out of the magic in the night, then I might as well go and get all the other shit over with. That's the magic of Thunder Road. That's the magic of redemption, the magic of Bruce, the magic of art. Without it, I'm nothing, and with it, we are everything.
My on Mondays is brought to you by MING Studios, a contemporary art space and international artist residency program in Boise, Idaho. You can hear more of Daniel's work on episode 195, My Ghosts and Reflections. For more information about MING's programming, or if you'd like to participate in My on Mondays, you can visit our website at mingstudios.org. We'll be back next Monday.